next storyteller is Toukhig Arabian, and Toukhig was born and raised in Aleppo, Syria. It's a place probably everybody in this room has heard of, but not for that long. She received a BA in English literature in Aleppo and taught ESL to adults. But when the city became a war-torn nightmare, almost overnight, she escaped with her 2 daughters. And her husband, who's with us tonight, where are you? Wave your hand. There he is. He joined her 18 months later. And they live in an apartment in Millbrae, and Toukhig is a salesperson for a jewelry store in San Francisco. Now, she might be upset with what I'm going to say now, but she wrote me an email a couple of days ago that I just treasure, and I'm going to share some of what she said. Okay. She said, "Thank you for checking in. In fact, I've been so nervous that I've been postponing everything I need to do. I'm even waking up early. It's already been a very busy and hectic few weeks, and I haven't been having enough time to sleep. I can't believe I finally memorized everything. That is, if I don't forget everything. This is something completely out of my comfort zone, but I do believe that telling your story helps you heal and recover from it, and at the same time it educates our listeners. When you go through an experience and then all of a sudden you find yourself in a fast-paced life, you usually try to keep up, forgetting that you needed a moment to digest what happened and contemplate a little bit about what took place. People usually don't ask you any questions, and they're probably not even interested to know about the details. All they know is you're alive. Initially, you do want to tell people about your stories, but then you get caught up in the hectic lifestyle and forget you even had a story. I'm happy that I stepped out of my comfort zone and took this time. Stories are, in fact, powerful. So, Toukhig, come join us.
Have you ever wondered why you're still alive, while someone else you knew isn't? Or have you ever wondered why you still have arms, legs, and eyes, while someone else you know doesn't? These were everyday thoughts that passed through my mind when I first escaped the Syrian civil war. My name is Toukhig, and I'm a Syrian Armenian. I was born and raised in Aleppo, Syria. And just like all the other Armenians in Aleppo, my grandparents survived the Armenian genocide in 1915, when 1.5 million Armenians were killed and massacred in the hands of the Ottoman Turks. My father, a self-made man, lost his ancestral house in Antep, and then his parents' house in Gırıkhan, both in modern-day Turkey. Therefore, if there was a lesson that he had never forgotten from his childhood, it was that we should never feel too grounded or attached to this new country who so lovingly accepted us. Because any moment we could be subject to what happened to him, leaving everything behind and having to start all over again. After all, this has been the destiny of Armenians for centuries. How ironical that nearly a century later, it was me who was going to flee, leaving the city that offered my father a safe harbor. Despite my father's and a lot of older generations' perspective, if you would tell anyone from my generation or younger that Aleppo would become a place with bombs falling on our houses, helicopters hovering over our neighborhoods, car bombs exploding, and snipers shooting from the rooftops, who would have told you there's no way. Aleppo was the safest place on earth. Aleppo was a place where we spent our summer days in the swimming clubs, where I sang in 3 different choirs, where I attended scouting, church youth group activities, art and piano classes. It's where I went to university and got a degree in English literature. Armenians were a small Christian minority. After settling in Aleppo, within a course of a generation, Armenian survivors went from being refugees to middle-class citizens, bringing their contribution in every aspect of art and all kinds of industries. We had our own hospitals, libraries, theaters, sports clubs, cultural centers, more than 10 churches, and more than 15 schools. My 2 older sisters got married in the US. So after about 15 years of being away from them, my family and I moved to the US to reunite with them. A year later, I went back to Aleppo, got married, stayed there for 7 more years. Life in Aleppo wasn't stressful or complicated. It was relaxing, fun, and full of social life. Muslim Arabs, who were the majority, were living peacefully with all kinds of minorities, like Christian Arabs, Assyrians, Kurds, and Armenians. No one talked about religion or politics, but we all kept our distinct identity. My husband's family was quite rooted in Aleppo. They had built their own successful manufacturing plant, and they were selling their own brand of oil and air filters locally as well as exporting them. My husband was managing the factory, and their business was prospering so much that he had no intention to come to the US. During those years, we began our family with 2 daughters. It was a period of unprecedented progress in Aleppo. New malls, fast internet, restaurants, hotels, supermarkets, water parks. It all started about mid-2011, when we first heard about tensions in a city called Daraa. We heard about demonstrations here and there. We heard about the emergence of the Free Syrian Army. We didn't know if this was good or bad, but we didn't imagine that the tensions would come to Aleppo. Then we heard about the forces entering another city called Homs. There was a civil war with bombings and shootings that lasted for months, but it all seemed remote to us. We assumed our government would reinstate stability. Then towards the end of 2011, Al-Qaeda forces started approaching Aleppo borders. There were kidnappings and booby-trapped cars, and people started becoming afraid of leaving their houses. By mid-2012, we heard of properties being confiscated and more violence. We heard that jihad was being preached in some mosques outside Aleppo. radical Muslims against Christians, and even against non-radical or moderate Muslims. A lot of people couldn't believe that Aleppo could become such a dangerous place where diversity could turn into mistrust and fear. I remember being in a restaurant with my husband and his family, and we were counting the sounds of the bombs exploding in another neighborhood, maybe half an hour away. 40, 41, 42. We were relaxed, thinking, they're not here. Imagine during that period, we even bought new furniture for the kids' room, since our baby was going to share her sister's room. I remember vividly the day in July when we got the phone call from the Bible camp my daughter attended. They were sending the kids home because the troops were advancing. They were now in Aleppo. We stayed in our house for a week. There was a meeting of neighbors one night, and they were talking about kidnappings. We heard that Armenians were targeted because they were perceived as government supporters. I was so frightened. My in-laws were still in denial, but I told my husband, I have to get out with our daughters. Soon, the snipers and helicopters became common sounds. We stayed in our homes, only working a few hours a day. We could hear the guns shooting. Every day, my husband went out looking for plane tickets to anywhere. We heard terrible stories about people who tried to escape Aleppo by car. My husband had a close friend who had a friend who worked at the Armenian Airlines, and she could find some tickets for us. It was in the middle of the pitch darkness. My husband walked all the way to a hotel that had electricity in order to print the plane tickets. It was 110 degrees, scorching hot August night. My friends were over to help me pack under candlelights and help with the kids. I barely slept for an hour and then woke up to see my 7-month-old baby sleeping with only diapers on in the middle of the balcony doorway. She had cried so much that my friends had to cool her off on the floor. We began our dangerous journey to the airport. There were a lot of checkpoints manned by different armies. We didn't know who controlled the airport. I covered my hair in case we were stopped by an Al-Qaeda checkpoint. We paid for a taxi that was nearly as expensive as the airplane tickets. We were stopped by a checkpoint by the Free Syrian Army. They looked at our IDs and let us pass. At the airport, everyone was exchanging stories of how they escaped and got there. We flew to Armenia and then to San Francisco. My husband stayed another week or so, then made it by car to Lebanon. I was so relieved. Living in such an expensive place wasn't easy for me. I looked for jobs day in and day out. My little one was just a baby, but it was more difficult for my 5-year-old then to leave her home and her father. Even though I was so lucky to have the support of my family, my Armenian community, and the church, it was still hard to leave everything behind and live with my family without my husband. At night, I would sing to them the same lullaby. And my daughter would stop me. "Mom, don't sing this lullaby again. This reminds me of my happy days with my dad." And then she would share some happy memories. She had so many questions in her mind, trying to make sense of things. "Mom, did God create those bad people who destroyed our city? If they knew that God loves them, would they change their mind?" My husband joined me 18 months later. God graciously provided our needs in such unexpected ways, every step of the way. Our university degrees from Syria don't count for much. But we're thankful that we now have jobs and can afford an apartment in Millbrae. Having and then losing material possessions teaches me that I can't always plan my future, and I'm not in control of my life, but He is. It teaches me that I shouldn't put my trust in what is changeable, but in Him alone. It teaches me that God is able to give me the strength to start all over again, just like He strengthened my father and my grandparents after the genocide. We're thankful that we're safe and healthy. We are thankful that our small family is together again. And I still wonder why I'm still alive while someone else isn't. And I still have some survivor's guilt. But I know, however, for sure, that God has a different plan for everyone. And this was His plan for us. Thank you.